The city never slept. By day, it shouted like a restless child, markets calling out prices, buses coughing smoke, taxis arguing with horns sharper than insults. By night, it whispered like an old storyteller, lowering its voice so only the careful could hear. Neon lights painted the streets bright, but beneath that shine, ancient shadows still walked. Elders used to say the city had a memory. It watched people rise, it watched them fall, and it never forgot the reason. In this city, beauty shops had slowly taken the place of shrines. Where people once gathered to seek blessings, they now gathered to fix their faces and change their hair. Yet the spirits did not leave. They only learned to sit quietly. Mirrors replaced sacred stones, chairs replaced prayer mats, but power still moved unseen. Some places glowed with harmless laughter. Others carried a weight that made the heart uneasy. Not every clean place is pure, the elders warned, but the city was loud, and wisdom was soft-spoken. Inside the salons, laughter flowed easily. Women and men sat close, sharing stories sweeter than honey and sharper than thorns. Compliments were given freely, but envy hid behind them like a snake in tall grass. "Your hair has grown so fast," one would say, smiling wide. "Yes," another replied, touching it proudly, while silently counting how she could outshine her friend. Dreams were whispered over dryers. Promises floated in the air. Everyone wanted to leave better than they arrived. Rumors traveled faster than tired feet. Some salons, people said, could change a life in a single visit. She entered poor and left favored, voices claimed. Others were spoken of in fear. "That place takes more than money," someone would mutter, lowering their voice. But in a city hungry for success, rumors were not warnings, they were invitations. Among the many children of this city was one whose blood still remembered the village. Poverty had shaped their hands early, but ambition burned bright in their chest. They knew the taste of being overlooked, of being measured by worn shoes and simple clothes. At night, they dreamed of respect, of walking into rooms where heads turned. "I will not remain small forever," they often told themselves. In this city, image was not pride, it was survival. Respect felt like air, invisible, but deadly to lose. People judged with their eyes before their ears. A clean face opened doors. A polished look softened hearts. The character learned this quickly. Each glance from others felt like a verdict. And slowly, without noticing, the hunger to be seen grew louder than the voice of caution whispering from the past. The city's noise could not follow them home. As soon as the gate closed, the shouting markets and angry horns were replaced by calm. The house was small, but it breathed peace. The floor was always swept clean, not because visitors were coming, but because order pleased the ancestors. At dawn and at night, prayers were whispered softly. Old photographs watched from the walls, and silence here was not emptiness, it was respect. An elder sat near the doorway, back straight despite the years. Their eyes had seen seasons change and people fail the same test again and again. When the young one spoke of the city, of new ways and fast success, the elder listened without interrupting. Then, slowly, they said, "Not every road that shines leads forward." The young one smiled politely. "These days are different," they replied. The elder shook their head. "The unseen never changes. Places that promise beauty without patience always ask for payment later." The warning lingered in the room like smoke after a fire. But outside that home, the city was calling again. Soon, an invitation arrived wrapped in sweetness. Friends spoke of a new salon, clean like a palace, expensive like a dream. "They say it changes lives," one whispered. "Just one visit," another laughed. "You'll see." That night, the young one lay awake. The elder's words pulled one way, the city's hunger pulled the other. Fear sat in the chest, but envy sat beside it, louder and more impatient. "Am I meant to stay small forever?" they asked the darkness. No answer came, only the sound of their own breathing. In the morning, nothing was announced. No arguments were made. The elder prayed, unaware. The young one stepped outside quietly, carrying desire instead of caution. The first step away from tradition made no sound at all, but somewhere unseen, something had begun to move. The moment the door closed behind them, the city seemed to vanish. The shouting markets, the screeching taxis, even the laughter of children playing in the streets, all of it disappeared, swallowed by the walls of the salon. Silence stretched, thick and unnatural, pressing against the ears. It was a calm that made the heart both curious and uneasy, like stepping into a place where the world outside no longer had meaning. The salon gleamed with polished floors and mirrors that reflected not just faces but intentions. It felt sacred, yet unsettling, as if some unseen presence watched the steps of every visitor. Each chair, each brush, each bottle of oils seemed arranged with purpose beyond mere beauty. A whisper of power lingered in the air, invisible but heavy, and the main character could not tell if it was blessing or warning. The workers moved quietly, speaking rarely, but their eyes told stories the lips refused. They watched every gesture, every shift in expression, and seemed to measure not just appearance, but the weight of ambition and desire in the heart. One nodded subtly as the character hesitated, another's glance lingered long enough to chill. Words were few, but judgment was everywhere. Instructions came in soft tones, almost like suggestions, but they carried weight heavier than the finest gold. Sit straight. Do not touch the mirrors. Speak only when spoken to. Each rule sounded small, ordinary even, yet each sank into the chest like a stone, pressing on the instincts that whispered caution. For a moment, the character felt fear, a shiver crawling along the spine, but the lure of transformation outweighed it. Excitement and fear sat side by side, twisting the stomach into knots and fire at once. One part of the heart warned, "This is not a place for the careless." Another part urged forward, "This is the chance that changes everything." The character took a trembling breath, heart pounding, eyes tracing the polished surfaces, and stepped further inside. Every instinct screamed pause, every desire pulled onward. Somewhere in the silence, something unseen stirred, waiting to see which would win, the wisdom of caution or the hunger for beauty. The mirrors hung tall along the walls, gleaming yet heavy with memory. Each one seemed to breathe, to hold within its glass the faces of everyone who had come before, their hopes, their secrets, their unspoken fears. When the young one looked into them, it felt as if the mirrors weighed down the chest, pressing on the heart with the weight of countless ambitions. A faint whisper seemed to ride the reflection, a voice too soft to understand, warning, judging, remembering. On the floor, hair clung to the tiles in scattered patterns, black and brown strands that no broom had ever touched. It was as if each lock carried a story, a fragment of someone's vanity, someone's desire, perhaps even a fragment of their soul. The young one bent slightly to study it, a shiver crawling along the spine, but the hands reached forward anyway, brushing aside doubt in pursuit of transformation. Other clients came and went. They emerged from the chairs radiant, flawless in every line, every curve, yet their eyes seemed distant, hollow as though something vital had been taken with the scissors and combs. They laughed, they spoke, but the warmth of their laughter did not reach their eyes. The young one watched, a knot tightening in the chest, sensing the subtle absence that beauty alone could not fill. Doubt whispered, small but persistent, "This is wrong. Something is missing." Yet the city's logic was louder. Everyone comes here. Everyone leaves beautiful. This is the way to rise, to be seen, to belong. The young one repeated these thoughts like a prayer, convincing the heart to hush its fears. It is only ambition, only modern life, only the city. Fear is for those who cannot dream. And so, with every word spoken silently to the soul, caution was set aside, and the hands reached for the promise of change, unaware of the silent cost already gathering in the air. The moment the young one stepped from the salon, the city seemed to notice. Heads turned in streets where no one had looked before. Whispers followed like a gentle wind, carrying admiration and surprise. "Look at her," someone said. "Did you see him?" another asked. Doors that were once closed seemed to open without effort, invitations arriving faster than footsteps could carry them. It was as though the city itself had recognized a new presence, a face it could not ignore. Praise came like rain after a drought, unexpected, abundant, and almost too easily earned. Friends marveled at the transformation, smiling as though nothing had changed, yet each glance measured against their own reflection, stirring quiet envy. "You've always had it in you," one would say, voice warm, yet eyes sharp, judging, comparing. The young one laughed, unaware of the shadows that followed each compliment. Names began to float through the city like floating leaves on a river. Suddenly, invitations arrived, whispered proposals of partnership, social gatherings, and even romance. Admiration was abundant, respect was swift, and pride grew heavier than the coins in the richest merchant's purse. A suitor brushed her hand lightly in greeting, saying, "You carry yourself like the city was made for you." And she believed him. At home, the space that had once been comforting now felt smaller. Chairs felt tight, rooms felt narrow, and the laughter of family seemed smaller, insignificant compared to the world outside that now celebrated her. She barely noticed the quiet prayers of the elders sitting in their corners, their eyes following her with concern. They watched silently, hoping their wisdom would not be lost in the noise of newfound attention. Rituals that had protected the family bloodline were skipped or mocked. "Those old ways are slow," she said, brushing aside offerings and prayers, unaware that each dismissal pulled the threads of protection tighter around the wrong hands. The pride that had bloomed with recognition now whispered that success was entirely her own, earned by effort alone, and owed to no one. At night, sleep brought no relief. Dreams twisted with unease, shadows in the corners of the mind, whispers in unfamiliar voices. Hair that had once obeyed her comb now resisted, curling and shifting unnaturally. The mirror reflected the beauty she had achieved, yet something in the eyes staring back was not hers, something empty, a hint of a cost yet unpaid. The young one smiled into the reflection, unaware that every praise, every glance, every invitation was part of a larger story, one that the city watched closely and the unseen remembered. Pride had grown taller than wisdom, and the roots that once held her steady were beginning to fray. The friend had always smiled the widest, laughed the loudest, yet inside, a fire burned that no one could see. Each compliment, each shared moment, hit a sharp edge. "You look different," they said, voice sweet, eyes calculating. But beneath that mask, jealousy gnawed, whispering that if one could rise, why not them too? Quietly, they followed the same path, slipping into the city streets when no one noticed. At night, they passed the same shimmering doors, their heartbeat quick with secret hope. The Salon welcomed them as it had welcomed the young one before, its silence swallowing their footsteps. Mirrors reflected them perfectly, but the weight in the air pressed on their chest. They whispered to themselves, "I deserve this too," as if repeating it could steal the magic before it noticed another. Admiration quickly turned into rivalry. Every compliment the first received felt like a spark in the fire. Every glance, every invitation, became a contest to outshine, to prove worth. Laughter between them twisted into measured smiles, each counting the other's successes in secret. "We'll see who is truly chosen," the jealous one muttered to no one but the wind. The streets were alive with voices carrying gossip faster than truth. "Did you hear? She changed overnight. They say anyone who enters that place is never the same." The whispers swirled, bending stories, exaggerating rumors, making every smile and frown a piece of evidence. The young one heard some of it, but pride kept ears closed and heart blind. Betrayal came gently, like a hand extended in friendship. The friend who laughed closest, who shared every moment of confidence, became the one who spoke words meant to harm. "Perhaps you were never as special as they said," one evening, laughter hidden behind polite tones. Doors that had once opened easily now remained shut, business opportunities vanished, whispers painting the young one as foolish. The city seemed to whisper back. Stories of curses, vanished clients, and strange happenings that once felt distant became loud warnings. "She is not the first," a shopkeeper murmured. "They say the place feeds on more than hair." Fear crept into the heart slowly, a cold reminder that something unseen was moving. Success slipped like water through fingers. Invitations no longer arrived, eyes that once admired looked past, doors stayed closed. Public embarrassment arrived sharply, like the sound of a drum beating the news of failure. Friends turned away subtly, and strangers murmured at the loss of grace. The mirror no longer reflected perfection. Hair fell in strange patterns, curls twisting unnaturally, shine dulled, and even skin seemed to shift, betraying the soul beneath. One morning, the young one rushed to find the salon, only to find an empty street where it had stood. No sign, no scent, no sound, only the memory of its polished floors and silent watchers. Panic rose, the heart realizing too late. The debt was never about beauty, hair, or admiration. It had taken something deeper, something unseen, a piece of the spirit. Kneeling on the empty pavement, the young one whispered to the wind, "I have been blind. I have been greedy." And somewhere, in the quiet of the city, the air held its breath, waiting for the reckoning to come. The city no longer greeted her. Streets that had turned heads and whispered admiration now seemed empty. Vendors avoided her glance, children no longer pointed, and even familiar faces passed without recognition. Silence had replaced praise, and it weighed heavier than any applause. The bustling city that once opened doors now seemed to close them quietly, its indifference a blade sharper than any insult. Where admiration had once followed her like a cloak, now pity lingered in eyes and tones. Invitations that had come easily were gone. Gossip had shifted. What was once praise became soft laughter behind her back, and strangers' eyes measured her as someone who had fallen too fast, too far. Friends averted their faces, unsure whether to offer comfort or join the chorus of quiet judgment. Each step felt heavier, each smile forced. Returning home brought no relief. The walls that had once carried warmth now felt suffocating. Parents sat silently in their corners, eyes weary and disappointed. A room that had held laughter now held only distance. Voices that had whispered prayers for protection were gone, replaced by quiet, judgmental eyes that saw the cost of disobedience. "Why did you leave the path?" the elder asked softly, not needing a reply. Shame rooted itself deep within, deeper than any bath, deeper than any tears. It could not be washed away. Each reflection, each step, carried the weight of what had been lost. Guilt curled around the chest, squeezing with each breath. "I was foolish," she whispered, voice cracking. "I was blind." Her body began to betray her. Sleep eluded her, her stomach churned, and energy fled. Hair that had once been admired fell in clumps, scattering across the floor like dry, brittle leaves. Even skin seemed to pale, as if the soul's absence reflected outward. The mirror became an enemy. Staring into it, she saw not herself, but a stranger, a fractured image that no longer aligned with the person she thought she was. Eyes that had once shone with pride now stared back hollow, and for the first time, she understood, beauty without respect, without roots, demanded a toll far heavier than she had imagined. In that reflection, she realized the truth that words and whispers could never convey. The city's applause had never been hers to keep, and the unseen debt had been settling all along, patiently, until the day it could no longer be ignored. The wind carried a voice, soft at first, then steady, cutting through the emptiness of the home. It was the elder who had watched silently, the one whose eyes always lingered longer than polite conversation allowed. "Child," the voice said, "do you not see the cost of what you chased so eagerly?" The words struck like drumbeats, calling the spirit to attention. Every corner of the room seemed to lean in, listening. "The Salon," the elder continued, "was no ordinary place. It feeds on envy, it drinks from pride, and it leaves the soul empty while the world praises the face." Each word seemed to unravel the illusions she had held so tightly. The mirrors, the applause, the invitations, all had been bait, a shadowed contract she had signed unknowingly. She trembled. I thought it was just beauty," she whispered, voice shaking. "But some debts," the elder said, stepping closer, "are not paid with coins or compliments. They are collected by fate. The unseen will always find its way." Silence filled the air, thick and heavy, as the weight of consequences sank deep. She could feel it now. Every sleepless night, every fallen hair, every hollow smile had been part of the ledger she could no longer deny. Two paths opened before her in the mind's eye, one paved with lies and denial, continuing the chase for status and admiration, the other narrow and shadowed, demanding humility, patience, and a return to truth. Her hands shook, heart caught between pride and the need to survive what was left of herself. She lowered her head, remembering the warnings whispered by ancestors in dreams and in the gentle voices of elders. "I see now," she murmured, tears tracing lines down her cheeks. "I have been blind and foolish." Pride folded under the weight of understanding. With trembling hands, she reached for the scissors resting nearby. Each cut of hair was a prayer, a surrender, a small return of the ego that had flown too high. The strands fell like autumn leaves, lifeless and pale, scattering across the floor, carrying pieces of what she had once called beauty. Returning to the land that remembered the bloodline, she walked through familiar paths, the earth greeting her bare feet as if welcoming a prodigal child. Streams whispered, trees bent gently, and the wind seemed to guide her toward cleansing and remembrance. She knelt beneath the old baobab, offering silent apologies to the ancestors and the family who had warned her. Finally, she faced those she had looked down upon, Family, neighbors, and friends, eyes open, voice trembling yet steady. "I sought beauty without wisdom," she confessed. "I chased applause and lost what mattered most." The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. And as they echoed, the weight lifted slightly from her shoulders. Humility, long neglected, had returned, and with it, the first small steps toward healing the soul she had almost lost. Tears fell not for the strands of hair that had been lost, nor for the fleeting praise of strangers, but for the bonds that had cracked under the weight of pride. She wept in the quiet of her small room, remembering the faces of those she had hurt, parents who had watched and prayed, friends whose trust she had shattered. "I have been foolish," she whispered, hands clutching the hem of her robe. "I sought beauty and status, and I broke the hearts that loved me most." The truth settled like a stone in her chest. Shortcuts never came free. Every whispered promise, every moment of admiration stolen too quickly, had demanded more than she could see. Pride had been her currency, and the ledger of consequence was already marked. "I thought I could cheat the world," she murmured, voice cracking. "But the world cannot be cheated." Time moved slowly, softening the raw edges of shame. The city continued its noise outside, yet within, the passage of days brought reflection instead of turmoil. She learned to listen to the quiet, birds calling in the morning, the hum of the wind through the trees, the soft rhythm of her own heartbeat. It was there, in that silence, that understanding deepened. She chose not the spotlight, not the applause that had once seemed like life itself. Instead, she walked in quiet streets, her presence humble, her head lowered. Fame and recognition were no longer necessary. The soul sought only peace. Gradually, she learned to exist without validation from the crowd. Each step without applause became a lesson in patience. Each smile she gave without expectation of return was a small act of healing. Life, she discovered, could be lived without the constant chase of eyes and envy. Finally, she returned home, shoulders heavy but eyes clear. The walls that had once felt like a cage now welcomed her, the voices of her family cautious but patient. She knelt before the elder who had warned her, bowed before her parents, and spoke words that cost more than tears alone. "I am sorry," she said, voice steady and raw. "I have learned that pride steals what love builds, and I have returned to honor what I almost lost." In that moment, the first thread of mended trust began to weave through the house. The lesson was bitter, the cost high, but humility had returned, and with it, the faint warmth of forgiveness. The journey was far from over, but the heart had remembered its way home. The young one walked slowly through familiar streets, each step measured and humble. Faces once bright with friendship now avoided her gaze, and whispers filled the spaces where laughter had lived. She stopped before those she had hurt, hands folded, voice trembling. "I wronged you," she said, voice carrying across the empty courtyard. "I let pride blind me, and I ask, can you forgive what I have done?" Some nodded slowly, some looked away, but all eyes held the weight of memory. She learned quickly that some losses would never return. Opportunities vanished, trust shattered, and words spoken in envy could not be unsaid. Each closed door became a reminder. Life demanded respect and patience, not shortcuts and applause. She carried these losses quietly, letting them teach her more than pain ever could. In the small hours of the morning, without mirrors or praise, she began the slow work of restoring herself. She prayed by candlelight, walked barefoot across the cool earth, and spoke truths she had once avoided. The spirit, bruised but not broken, began to heal, learning to find value in humility rather than in public admiration. Peace seeped into her heart where once hunger for attention lived. She no longer measured her worth by the eyes of strangers or the sparkle of a fleeting crowd. With each day, hair grew back slowly, but wisdom grew faster, threads of patience and understanding intertwining with each new strand. Her story became a warning, whispered quietly from friend to friend, cautioning those tempted by easy beauty and empty glory. The city marched on around her, bright lights hiding shadows, but the lesson lingered. New salons opened where old ones had vanished, and yet she moved differently, aware of traps and dangers that others could not yet see. An elder might have said, "The streets remember, even when the people forget." And so it was. The lesson remained, wrapped in the story of one who had chased glory and learned that true beauty grows slowly, humbly, and with respect for what the unseen demands. The city would continue, full of voices and temptations, but she had become the quiet voice that reminded all who listened that shortcuts often steal more than they give.